15 Black R&B legends, 15 obsessions, mysteries, and final moments the world has never fully understood. Behind those immortal voices lies a darker side of fame, whispered confessions, unexplained events, and secrets that were never meant to reach the public. Some revealed lifelong regrets on their deathbeds, others hinted at hidden battles and haunting stories that still spark debate today. And a few left behind puzzles so chilling that fans and historians haven't stopped searching for answers. Get ready, these legends took their deepest truths to the edge of eternity. Number 1. Marvin Gaye. Singer Marvin Gaye's father sits in a Los Angeles jail this morning, held without bail and charged with the murder of his own son. If the story of James Brown's family was unsettling, what unfolded in the Gaye household was a wound so deep that generations of fans still feel it. A man who once preached from the pulpit, voice booming with gospel conviction, became the very person who destroyed the future of his brilliant, world-changing child. People can understand when fame derails an artist. They can accept tragedy brought on by addiction, pressure, or temptation. But when the blow comes from someone who shares your blood, the shock goes far beyond heartbreak. It becomes the kind of pain that defies explanation. And inside his prison cell, when the world finally fell silent, Marvin Gaye Sr. uttered a sentence that stunned everyone who heard it. "I never liked Marvin. I always hated him." Those words were not remorse. They were not justification. They were a chilling confession, a doorway into a family darkness no one had fully understood. A father, who should have been a place of shelter and strength, admitted that he had spent years harboring hostility toward his son. That single admission shattered the illusion of a sacred household and revealed a truth more tragic than any song Marvin ever recorded. Rumors had long swirled that Marvin Gaye Sr. could not bear his son's extraordinary success. In the black community of that era, a child surpassing the parent was not always seen as a blessing. Jealousy, resentment, and insecurity festered in silence. Friends close to Marvin said he often described his father as a shadow, not one that protected him, but one that followed him relentlessly. Marvin Gaye, the soul behind What's Going On, a man who poured the world's pain, beauty, and injustice into his music, was living with a private torment he could never resolve. He sang for unity, but inside his own home he faced a divide too wide to mend. And when his father finally spoke those bitter words, the tragedy deepened, a broken bond, a love that never existed, a family where forgiveness never stood a chance. What haunted the public was not only the murder itself, but the truth it exposed. Even a genius cannot escape the storms that rise within their own walls. Marvin Gaye Sr.'s confession transformed the story into one of the most devastating family tragedies in American music, a scar that remains because some wounds simply never close. Number 2. James Brown. James Brown was celebrated as the godfather of soul, a force of nature, a man who could turn any stage into a thunderstorm of rhythm and fire. Yet when the lights dimmed for the final time, he did not leave the world with a new anthem, but with a chilling declaration: "They tried to poison me. They tried us." He did not say this in the glory of his prime or in front of roaring crowds. He whispered it on his deathbed, at the moment when truth becomes sharper than fear. The same man who once electrified millions with "I Feel Good" left behind a haunting suspicion that someone wanted him gone. His daughter Yama Brown insisted that her father never spoke without intention. James was direct, decisive, and fiercely honest. That made his final insinuation all the more terrifying. After his death in 2006, the family urged authorities to reopen the case, pushing for a deeper investigation, but the truth remained elusive, slipping through their fingers like a restless ghost. Fans exchanged theories in hushed tones. Did James know too much? Was he battling unseen forces within the entertainment world? Anyone who truly understood his life knew James Brown was more than a performer. He was an empire, a living goldmine. He controlled copyrights, touring revenue, properties, business deals, assets worth hundreds of millions. A man as bold, unyielding, and outspoken as James could easily make enemies. And in the days before his death, his health declined with alarming speed. Doctors noted that he was improving from pneumonia, then suddenly, inexplicably, he worsened. A hospital nurse later revealed that James kept whispering, "Don't let them touch me." No one knows who they were, but the fear behind his voice was unmistakable. If his final warning held any truth, then the stage that made him a legend was never safe at all. It may have been a battlefield of hidden traps, a place where even the greatest black icon could not protect himself. James Brown's final breath did more than end a legacy. It left behind a chilling reminder of the price one pays for becoming immortal in music. Number 3, Teddy Pendergrass. The crash. The screech of metal, shattered glass exploding through the air. Streetlights spinning past in a blur of terror. The night of March 1982 did not just change Teddy Pendergrass's life, it shattered it. In a single violent moment, the magnetic voice that had driven women across America into a frenzy became a man confined to a wheelchair forever. They called it a tragic accident, a cruel twist of fate. But in his later years, Teddy would quietly say to close friends, "It wasn't set an accident." That sentence alone cracked open a darkness many fans had never dared to consider. Teddy wasn't just another R&B singer. He was history's first solo R&B artist to earn 5 consecutive platinum albums. His fame soared to levels that even the industry struggled to contain, and when someone climbs that high, there are always hands waiting to push them off the edge. Friends recalled that after the crash, Teddy often hinted about people who didn't want me on top anymore. One detail made the night even more haunting. Teddy was not alone in the car. Sitting beside him in the Rolls-Royce was Tanika Watson, a transgender nightclub performer barely known at the time. Her involvement instantly transformed the crash into a media circus. Teddy's reputation took a brutal hit, and that chaos, conveniently, overshadowed a disturbing fact reports later suggested the car's brakes were malfunctioning. Yet, no one investigated further. No one wanted to. Within the Pendergrass family, suspicion lingered for years. In industry circles, whispers spread certain powerful figures were unhappy with Teddy's growing independence, his blunt honesty, his refusal to be controlled. He openly criticized contract terms, demanding freedom at a time when black artists were rarely allowed it. Teddy Pendergrass was bold, vocal, unwilling to let record labels define him, and perhaps that courage painted a target on his back. What made his story even more heartbreaking was his resilience. Despite paralysis, he fought his way back to the stage, voice soulful as ever, gaze still fierce. But behind closed doors, he confided a deeper pain. "I didn't fall because of fate. I fell because of people." For many fans, that confession sealed a belief the crash of 1982 was no random misfortune, and when Teddy passed away in 2010, the question lingered, a scar that never healed in the history of R&B. Number 4, Jackie Wilson. Jackie Wilson's life reads like a shadow-soaked noir story, fame glittering on the surface, danger lurking underneath. He was once crowned Mr. Excitement, the man who could ignite an entire arena with a single spin, a single scream. But in his final years, trapped in a long, silent coma, Jackie left behind fragments of memory, including one chilling claim that the mafia had been pulling his strings through performance contracts. His family shared this unsettling detail, and instantly the rumor mill erupted. In the 1960s and 70s, organized crime didn't just control nightclubs and bars, they seeped into the entertainment business, especially the world of touring and live performance. For a massively successful black superstar like Jackie Wilson, being cornered into predatory contracts or threatened behind closed doors was not just possible. Many insiders whispered it was almost inevitable. And if Jackie's confession was real, he wasn't the first. only one of the few brave enough to hint at it when he sensed his time running out. The drama surrounding his life became even more haunting the night he collapsed on stage in 1975 while performing Lonely Teardrops. The moment was so surreal, so tragically timed, it felt orchestrated, as if an unseen force had decided his fate. From that night on, Jackie never truly returned. He slipped into a coma, unable to speak, unable to explain the secrets he had carried for years. All that remained were the memories told by those closest to him, how Jackie spoke of contracts he could not escape, of powerful figures who wouldn't let him go, of a world that demanded everything yet offered no protection. Fans are left with a haunting question. Was the mafia really behind his suffering? Or were these the echoes of a man exhausted by years of exploitation? No official answer ever surfaced. Yet that faint confession, offered before his voice fell silent forever, was enough to convince many that Jackie Wilson wasn't just claimed by tragedy, but by a ruthless machine that once gripped the entire entertainment industry. Jackie Wilson is gone, but his ghost has never left. In his recordings, listeners still hear the fire, the electricity, the raw soul. But behind that flame was a life lived under the shadow of unseen power, a story that continues to send chills through anyone who dares to revisit it. Number 5. Ray Charles. If Teddy Pendergrass left behind the mystery of a crash, then Ray Charles stunned the world with a revelation of an entirely different kind. It wasn't a conspiracy, not a dark industry secret, but a brutally human truth. As he lay dying in 2004, the blind genius who saw music more clearly than any man alive finally revealed the real numbers of his private life: 12 children with 9 different women. To the public, Ray Charles was a musical architect, a revolutionary who blended gospel, blues, jazz, and R&B into something only he could create. But his personal life, that was a symphony of beauty and disorder, passion and consequence. For years, fans believed he had only a few acknowledged children, reinforced by the carefully crafted image of Ray as an honorable father on stage. So when the truth emerged, the world saw a different Ray Charles, still extraordinary but undeniably flawed. What few ever knew was that Ray had already prepared for the day when truth could no longer hide. He created a trust fund for all of his children, even those who had stayed away from the spotlight. His family confirmed that he gathered them together for one final meeting, a bittersweet farewell where he divided his estate equally and expressed his final wishes. Not every child accepted this revelation with grace. For some, the truth had arrived too late, reopening wounds they had long learned to ignore. Yet that moment showed something essential. Ray Charles refused to leave this world wearing a mask. The shock of the story wasn't just in the numbers, but in what they represented: a generation of black artists raised in hardship, trying to balance genius with human frailty. Ray achieved immortality through music, but stumbled in the private realm where fame offered no guidance. And yet, his confession did not destroy his legacy. Instead, it made him more real, more dimensional, no longer simply a legend, but a man seeking redemption at the end of his journey. His final honesty reminded the world of one truth: even icons carry secrets deeper than the songs that made them famous. And perhaps that is why Ray Charles remains unforgettable. Number 6. Sam Cooke. There are few tragedies more haunting than a genius dying at the height of their brilliance, and Sam Cooke stands as one of the most painful examples. In 1964, he was found dead under circumstances so controversial that, decades later, no explanation has ever felt complete. But what chills people far more than the theories is what Sam Cooke said before his death. Those closest to him remembered it clearly. He often whispered a fear that clung to him like a shadow. "They set her after me." Sam Cooke wasn't just a velvet-voiced heartthrob. He was one of the very few black artists of his era bold enough to openly challenge the music industry's grip over black talent. By founding his own publishing company, he became one of the first to own the rights to his music, a revolutionary act in the 1960s. For a black artist at that time, such independence wasn't simply ambition, it was rebellion, a declaration of war against a system built to keep people like him under control, and that defiance made Sam Cooke a threat to powerful figures who preferred him silent and compliant. What many never knew is that a few weeks before his death, Sam scribbled fragmented notes in his diary about a dangerous game and people trying to take everything. When those writings were revealed years later, they fueled long-standing suspicions. Was Sam Cooke murdered, or was it all an unfortunate coincidence perfectly timed to silence him? The setup-like nature of his death becomes even harder to ignore when you consider that only hours earlier, he was full of life, mapping out major plans for the next stage of his career. A man who was preparing for the future was suddenly erased from it. When his earlier warnings, "They're after me," resurfaced, fans felt as though Sam had sensed the darkness closing in on him. That is what makes his story so heartbreaking. It is not merely a personal tragedy, it is the story of an entire generation of black artists who fought for freedom, yet remained trapped in chains no one could see. Sam Cooke sang about liberation, love, and justice, but at the end, he himself was swallowed by a shadowy force he could not outrun. "They separa after me." A message, a warning, and an echo of a musical history where brilliance has far too often been suffocated by the powers lurking behind the curtain. Number 7. Etta James. For years, that immortal melody convinced the world that Etta James was the pure embodiment of romance, the voice of devotion, of tenderness, of love itself. But behind the glow of the stage, behind the hypnotic smile that charmed millions, lived a very different Etta. A woman locked in a decades-long war with addiction, tangled in secret relationships that few ever suspected. And before her death in 2012, she chose not to preserve a flawless facade, but instead opened the door to her deepest wounds, as if she had nothing left to hide. The shock was immense because Etta James had always symbolized strength. She broke conventions, refused limitations, and proved that a black woman could command the music industry with the same fire as any legend before her. Yet parallel to her fierce resilience was a private battle that never ended. In her final revelations, Etta confessed that she had spent her entire life fighting the grip of a substance that had swallowed countless R&B artists across generations. It wasn't simply addiction, it was her escape, her attempt to numb the loneliness that even roaring applause could not soothe. What startled the world even more were her admissions of hidden affairs. Rumors swirled that she had been romantically involved with some of the most powerful male artists of her time, names that, if spoken aloud, could have sent shockwaves through the entire music world. Though never publicly confirmed, Etta's own acknowledgement turned those whispers into legends, adding both fire and tragedy to her already mythic image. In her final words, there was a loneliness so raw that fans suddenly understood. Sometimes the most heavenly voices come from the most tormented souls. She had fame, respect, and a legacy carved into eternity. Yet when the curtain dropped, she was just a woman searching for affection in secret arms, seeking comfort in addiction, and ultimately finding clarity only in confession. To the world, Etta James remains an icon. But those last honest admissions stripped away the distance between her and her audience. They revealed not a fallen star, but a liberated one. A woman finally speaking her truth after a lifetime of carrying burdens in silence. And for that, Etta James will be remembered not only for the voice that enchanted the world, but for the courage to bear her most painful secrets. Number 8. Curtis Mayfield. Unlike Sam Cooke's abrupt and mysterious end, Curtis Mayfield's downfall came slowly, painfully. After the 1990 stage accident that left him paralyzed, he spent years confined to a wheelchair. Yet it was during that long, silent struggle that Curtis delivered one of the most honest, haunting reflections about his entire generation of musicians. We ruined ourselves with the drug culture. Curtis Mayfield had once been the voice of uplift and determination. Move On Up wasn't just a song, It became an anthem for Black pride, ambition, and progress. But even in that brilliance, a darker truth quietly lived beneath the glow. Many artists of his era slipped into the seductive pull of substance use, Curtis included. When the spotlight faded and he was forced to confront the past, Curtis admitted that his generation had allowed drugs to wash away more than talent. They eroded friendships, shattered bands, and dimmed the creativity that could have defined an even greater musical era. Few people know this, but in his last intimate conversations, Curtis didn't just reflect on his own mistakes. He spoke with sorrow about friends who died far too young, about groundbreaking groups that self-destructed because they couldn't escape addiction's grip. To him, this wasn't a confession of personal failure. It was a lament for a whole community of artists who had the potential to build a golden age, but allowed it to be stained by their own weaknesses. Fans heard those words with heavy hearts. Curtis was not dramatizing his pain. He was simply speaking truth, a truth sharp enough to cut. A generation that once sang about hope ultimately lost battles with its own shadows. And Curtis Mayfield's final reflection became both an indictment and a plea. Music can bring light, but people must choose not to let darkness destroy it. Number 9. Michael Jackson. Even when the spotlight was gone, Michael Jackson remained the center of storms. But among all the secrets he shared, none was more chilling than the confession remembered by those closest to him. "They want to kill me for the insurance money." Michael didn't say this once in a moment of panic. He repeated it over and over, as though the thought stalked him through every hallway of his final years. He believed he was surrounded by people who wanted to use him, trap him, and possibly remove him entirely for their own financial gain. To some, it sounded like fear. To others, like prophecy. But when Michael died suddenly in 2009, the world froze, and that statement transformed into a terrifying premonition. Those who lived near him recalled how deeply distrustful he had become. He rarely allowed anyone fully into his confidence, not even longtime associates who had stood beside him for decades. The entertainment world he once ruled had become the same place where he felt most hunted. It was a cruel irony, a man adored by millions, yet behind the curtain, shivering in fear of the people closest to him. One detail shook fans to their core. Not long before his passing, Michael confided to a private physician that he feared someone was quietly keeping watch over him, monitoring him without his knowledge. That claim would echo through later investigations, painting an even darker shadow over his final days. Was this the paranoia of a weary superstar? Or a truth buried beneath power, money, and silence? Michael Jackson left behind eternal music and a void that can never be filled. But his haunting confession, "They want to kill me," remains a wound carved into the memories of those who loved him, a reminder that even legends are not safe from the darkness around them. Number 10. Rick James. If Whitney Houston was drowned by love, then Rick James was imprisoned by his own wildness. The world remembers him as the unapologetic king of funk, the man who lived for music, indulgence, and an endless parade of parties. But before his death in 2004, Rick left behind a confession that stunned even his closest admirers. It wasn't fit freedom, it was a prison. For years, Rick James embraced the persona of a rebellious outlaw, a superstar who refused to follow rules and lived purely for pleasure. But beneath that glittering chaos was a tightening noose. The sleepless nights, the disposable relationships, the non-stop frenzy of parties, they looked like symbols of liberation. In truth, they were traps wrapped in glitter, and Rick, the man who seemed to command the whirlwind, had become its prisoner. Friends revealed that in his final years, Rick often spoke about his glory days with a bitterness that surprised them. He said he had believed rebellion would save him from society's expectations, only to discover that he had become enslaved to his own cravings. His confession wasn't simply regret, it was a glaring warning about a lifestyle many young artists still mistake for freedom. A lesser-known detail casts an even sadder shadow. In a private conversation, Rick described himself as a lost man in a maze of mirrors. He saw countless versions of himself reflected in the parties, the excess, the noise. But with every reflection, he drifted further away from who he really was. By the time he realized the truth, the cost was devastating. His health, his reputation, and the peace he had spent his whole life searching for. Number 11. Barry White. The deep velvet voice that once made the world melt with desire ended its journey in a quiet storm of remorse. I left too many children behind. At first, the sentence sounds like gentle regret, but for Barry White, it was the weight he carried until his final breath. Barry White was adored not only for his music, but for the extravagant, larger-than-life way he lived. Yet that same lifestyle left scars. Children who shared his blood but not his presence. According to his family, this truth tormented him most as his health declined. There were nights when he lay awake whispering that he had lived recklessly, and that the one thing he could never repair was the absence he left in his children's lives. He was celebrated as the king of love songs, the man who sang about devotion, passion, and eternal romance. But behind the stage lights, Barry struggled with a role he could never fully master, that of a father. While the world heard him promise unwavering love, his own children grew up with questions he never answered. It was this contradiction, the sensual icon on stage and the man fleeing responsibility off stage, that crushed him far more than any illness. A little-known detail exposes an even deeper layer of his sorrow. Barry White wrote several private letters to his children, letters filled with apologies and fear of their disappointment, fear of hearing the question he dreaded most. Where were you when I needed you? Many of those letters were never sent. After his death, they were found tucked away like confessions meant for a courtroom of ghosts. In those pages, the world finally saw a different Barry White. Not the seductive legend, but a wounded man longing for forgiveness he never found in time. Number 12. Whitney Houston. Some confessions are never spoken on stage. They surface only behind closed doors, whispered to the few who truly understand. For Whitney Houston, the heavenly voice who once ruled the world, her private admission was a blade straight to the heart of anyone who ever loved her. I could never escape Bobby and the drugs. Behind the glitter and the spotlight, Whitney lived inside a constant battle. On one side stood the polished image of America's golden girl. On the other was a fragile woman, shackled by a love that was intoxicating, destructive, and impossible to break. Bobby Brown wasn't just the man she adored. He became the doorway into a darkness she could never outrun. To the public, their love seemed electric, fiery, unforgettable. But to Whitney, it slowly transformed into chains she didn't have the strength to remove. In her final months, those who saw her closely said she appeared restless, troubled, as if losing pieces of herself one day at a time. She confessed to friends that she never truly controlled her own life, not her career, not her choices, not even her emotions. Almost every decision, from the songs she sang to how she faced the cameras, was colored by Bobby's shadow. Her confession wasn't just sorrow, it was surrender, a realization that love had morphed into a trap. There is a detail few know. Whitney once wrote several pages in a diary, later leaked, where she described herself as a beautiful bird trapped in a glass cage. That cage sparkled under the lights, dazzling the world, but inside she was slowly fading. When those words became public, people finally understood what her music had always tried to hide, that beneath the triumphant riffs and soaring high notes was a woman drowning in helplessness. Whitney Houston, who once stood at the very peak of greatness, was ultimately dragged downward by the same heart she gave so freely. Her final confession was not simply about love, it was the suffocated cry of a woman ensnared by addiction and control. And now, when listeners return to her timeless ballads, they don't just hear the voice of a diva, they hear the quiet tears of a soul that never truly found freedom. Number 13. Donny Hathaway. The 15th-floor window of New York's Essex House did not simply witness a fall in 1979. It witnessed the collapse of a tortured genius. Donny Hathaway, the soulful architect of some of the most emotional music in R&B history, had confided to close friends that he felt watched, cornered, suffocated by unseen forces in the industry. And then, suddenly, he was gone, leaving behind a mystery that has never been truly resolved. The official report called it an accident, but the whispers never stopped. Many believe there was more behind that fall, that it wasn't just a tragic slip. After all, Donny wasn't just another artist, he was a visionary capable of breaking boundaries, challenging norms, and reshaping the soundscape of soul music. And sometimes, that kind of brilliance becomes dangerous to the wrong people. Friends remembered his final days with a chill. Donny often mentioned whispers in my ear, a haunting phrase that suggested mental torment far deeper than anyone understood. He even said outright, "They want to finish me off." At the time, most brushed it off as exhaustion or paranoia, but when he plunged from that window, those words echoed back like a prophecy, a detail that now sends shivers down the spine of anyone who loved him. Inside his hotel room were unfinished compositions, scribbled with repeated phrases about release and letting go. No one knows whether he wrote them in clarity or in a moment of despair, but they felt like clues, fragments from the edge of a breaking mind. When pieced together with his earlier confessions, Donny Hathaway's death seems less like a closed case and more like a missing piece in a much larger puzzle, a puzzle woven with the pressure, cruelty, and shadows that lurk behind the glamour of the music industry. A genius may have fallen that night, but the questions he left behind still refuse to fade. Number 14, Phyllis Hyman. Because it wasn't just a cry for help, it was the final, devastating proof of the unbearable loneliness carried by a legend. A woman who rose to the heights of artistic brilliance only to be crushed by shadows no one dared to name. It wasn't an album or a triumphant performance that shook the music world. It was a single slip of paper. In 1995, Phyllis Hyman, one of R&B SIT's most commanding and elegant voices, left behind a short, heartbreaking note, "The music industry has used and abused me." And just like that, she was gone, leaving behind a bruise on the hearts of her fans that time has never healed. Phyllis wasn't only known for her voice. She embodied elegance, melancholy, and a kind of emotional depth that seeped into every note she sang. Yet behind the thunderous applause lived a woman fighting battles no one could see. She often told close friends she felt exploited, manipulated, and treated not as an artist but as a product, a machine built to generate money for others. Her final words confirmed what she had been enduring for years. The very industry she devoted her life to was the one that ultimately broke her spirit. In her later years, she spoke more openly of her despair, how she no longer had control over her career, her contracts, her finances, or even her own health. She was pushed to perform when her body begged for rest. Each obligation, each demand, each promise she could not refuse, slowly backed her into a corner from which she could not escape. What made it even more tragic was how casually people dismissed her pain, calling it typical of the business. A little-known detail reveals just how deep her sorrow ran. On the night before her passing, she had a long, quiet conversation with a close friend and confessed plainly, "Music betrayed me." That friend later said her eyes held no spark, only the exhaustion of a woman drained dry by a merciless system. And when her note was found, it was more than a farewell. It was a damning testament to an industry that helped create her brilliance and her destruction. Number 15, Al Green. It wasn't a final confession whispered on his deathbed. It came during a hospital stay after a terrifying incident, a moment when Al Green, stripped of all the glamour, revealed a truth he had spent his entire life hiding. He turned to a close friend and said quietly, "The secret affairs and the children, Those are the burdens I shall carry forever." For a man celebrated as the very soul of soul music, the confession exposed a side of him that was painfully human. Al Green, whose voice once melted hearts across the world, lived behind lyrics of devotion and sweetness. Yet his real life was tangled in complicated relationships, children conceived outside his home, and promises he never fully honored. He admitted these were weights he carried daily, invisible chains that no applause could loosen. One friend recalled that whenever people praised him as the ultimate symbol of love, Al Green would offer a peculiar smile. It wasn't pride, it was a mask, because he knew his own love story was fractured, built on secrets that could destroy the perfect image the public adored. Those secrets weren't harmless shadows. They pushed Al Green into emotional crises again and again. On certain nights, he privately confessed that he no longer knew the difference between real love, obsession, and momentary desire. The affairs carved themselves into his life, leaving marks deeper than the music he created. Behind the silky vocals and timeless hits was a man wrestling with wounds that refused to heal, wounds born not from the stage but from the hidden chapters of his heart. These stories remind us that behind the music we love are lives filled with secrets, pain, and battles the world never saw. If this video opened your eyes or touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us uncover more hidden truths and forgotten legends. Hit the like button, turn on the notification bell, and stay with us for the next chapter. Trust me, the stories coming next will shock you even more.